The Pentagon confirmed what we had already known, which is that in response to the ISIS-K attack at the Kabul airport, it mistook a civilian vehicle for an ISIS-K threat when it launched a drone strike on August 29th that killed 10 civilians. So this is the first admission. An investigation by the US command found that the August 29th strike killed an innocent aid worker along with 9 members of his family, including 7 children, and that the youngest victim was aged 2. The Defense Department previously, of course, called this a righteous strike, quote unquote, saying that it had tracked the white sedan for hours after it left a suspected Islamic State Khorasan safe house, and that its officials believed the car was loaded with explosives for an imminent attack. That was not the case. In fact, the driver, Sumaya Ahmadi, was a longtime aid worker for a US-based group and was hauling water cans for his family, according to officials and video obtained by the Washington Post and others. Like we said, this is something that we had known. Sadly, it was suspected, I think, from jump. It was surfacing on Twitter. And now we have this confirmation from the Pentagon. So this is from General Frank McKenzie saying, "I'm now convinced as many as 10 civilians, including 7 children, were tragically killed in that strike. We analyzed that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died are associated with ISIS-K or were a direct threat to US forces. The strike was taken in the earnest belief that it would prevent an imminent threat to our forces in the evacuees at the airport, but it was a mistake, and I offer my sincere apology. As the combatant commander, I am fully responsible for the strike in this tragic outcome." So there you have it, a sincere apology that will not bring back 10 civilians, 7 of whom are children, a US aid worker. I mean, could this have gone any worse?
Yep, so there's a lot of takeaways from this, and I actually want to give a tiny bit of credit here to some follow-up reporting from CNN, and tiny bit of credit to the Pentagon for giving full transparency on this, although very belatedly. I'll come back to those in a minute. But overall, there's a giant elephant in the room here, which is we kill civilians with drone strikes all the time, and they're oftentimes kids. And the media almost never, ever covers it. And even in this instance, they largely waited for permission from the Pentagon. If you're thinking, wait, didn't the Young Turks already cover the story? Yes, that's right, we did, weeks ago. Because, and by the way, we didn't go and get it on our own. You have to search for it, and it'll appear once or twice in some outlets. Like the BBC had a very good report on this at the time, and that's the source that we used weeks ago to do this. But if the Pentagon doesn't give permission to the media, i.e. saying, okay, fine, we did it. If they continue to lie, the media will never say that they lied, never. So here the Pentagon gave rare permission to criticize it, and that's why you're seeing it all over mainstream media weeks after we covered it. Now the second part of that is, I said we kill civilians all the time, so I want to give you guys context. In 2019 alone, we killed 700 civilians on US airstrikes. So I'm super happy that the media seems to be genuinely outraged about the 10 civilians killed in that particular strike. But how about the 700 that we kill on an average year in Afghanistan? And then one last stat for you guys: in between 2005 and 2019, Save the Children charity did an analysis and found out that there were 5 kids killed or wounded per day in the war in Afghanistan. That's a stunning 26,025 kids who were killed or maimed in that war. And how often did you hear about that in mainstream media? Almost never, right? So I'll just note that this is part of the critique of us withdrawing from that war, a critique I did not see when we were in that war for 20 straight years.
Yeah, that's right, Jig. And I mean, I agree with what you laid out there, and it is tragic. This is gut-wrenching. And you're right, at least the Pentagon for now on this particular issue, they're being transparent. When he talks about a mistake, well, this is a mistake that you can't come back from. This is not like stepping on somebody's foot. Cannot come back from this kind of mistake. And secondly, Americans need to know what's done in our name. with our taxpayers' dollars at all times, the good, the bad, and the ugly at all times. The Pentagon should not be able to decide what it's going to tell the American people and what it will and what it will not make public, as long as they're using our taxpayers' dollars. But this is definitely a very sad and depressing. And Cenk, as you laid out, it happens far too often. And I think a lot of times we become desensitized to these kinds of stories. I want everybody to think about that could be us, that could have been us, that could have been our family, that could have been any of us. So we need to care about what is done in our name and with our money.
This is not just the legacy of what's been happening now, of Biden, right? It's not just Obama's legacy. I think Obama is largely associated with drones in a lot of ways. But Trump himself also, he increased drone strikes by 400%. And as Cenk said, the fact is that the Pentagon wasn't readily admitting when they killed civilians and when they didn't. They just weren't talking about it, right? And so, Obama did an inventory of his drone strikes, which was like painful enough. It's like if you're inventorying it and you see that many people, civilians being killed, why don't you stop the program? Why don't we stop the drone? I'm sorry, it doesn't work. If you can't tell, not just who's an enemy combatant, right? Because at some point Obama had set out that it was like, look, if you're between the ages of 18 and however old, you're automatically an enemy combatant no matter what. So that's wrong, number one. Number two is, but if you can't see that children as young as 2 are not targets and are not enemy combatants, then your program is bad. Then your intelligence, your military intelligence is terrible. So the whole program should be shut down. And look, whistleblower after whistleblower has said the same thing, right? Like that this program does not work, that they are regularly told to fire on civilians. They're obviously suffering horrible PTSD from it, but not nearly what the civilians on the ground are suffering themselves. We know the blowback from these kinds of incidents, which is creating more animus, creating honestly more breeding ground for folks like ISIS-K to say, look, we got a perfect strategy for recruitment. And it goes on, and Lindsey Graham gets very excited.
So I want to give a little bit more context to what Francesca is saying. So that we've been covering signature strikes for a long time on TYT, and so those and they were very prevalent under President Obama. And what they do is they do not have intelligence on a specific person. They have intelligence on a signal. So often a cell phone, sometimes a computer. Could it be that someone else has the computer, like their kids are watching YouTube to make up an example? By the way, which happens often. Yeah, and do they have the wrong computer, the wrong cell phone all the time? And we kill people anyway, even without knowing who they are. That is a regular operating procedure for the Pentagon. And then look at how effective propaganda is. Trump was billed as anti-war. He increases drone strikes by several 100%, kills way more civilians than even Obama, who killed a lot. And still everybody says he's anti-war. No, he's not. I mean, what he did with drone strikes was monstrous. And then yet his base is like, oh yeah, he's a peacenik. It's absurd, it's absurd. And then on the issue of how bad it is, these strikes, the media allows the Pentagon to paint it as if it's super precision and they have great information. They have terrible information. And in this case, now that they finally admitted it in one instance, you see how bad it was. That's why I gave them credit for the full transparency on this one, because they explained, yeah, it was an aid worker, so an ally of ours, and he had driven by what we think is an ISIS-K headquarters, which we interestingly didn't bomb. He happened to drive by it. That's the main thing they had. And then the second thing they had was he loaded up a bunch of water into his van. And so since he was loading something into his van at a later time, they thought it must have been bombs. And then they explained, we'd say, oh, we definitely got the right guy because there was a secondary explosion. That was that vicious bomb that he had in his van. Now they explain, oh, it was a propane tank on the driveway. Like so many people have in that area. So every part of their intel was not only wrong, but it was so flimsy. Look at what they go on. He drove by the area and loaded something into his van. Let's kill him and all of his children. So we've been doing that for decades. So this is the first time you heard about it because you saw mainstream media doing their crocodile tears. Yeah, look, reporter by reporter, they're so bad at their job, it literally might be the first time they ever heard about it. And so they might be genuinely outraged that these kids were killed. I'd ask them to pretty please do your jobs, because then you'd be outraged every day, 5 times a day for the last 14 years. And then you might actually cover a war properly and not just be outraged when we withdraw from one.
Yes. Yeah, and I just last point, like just to double down on the fact that if the Pentagon didn't say it happened, the media says it didn't happen. Think about how chilling that is, right? And that is par for the course when it comes to US military ventures abroad and this, war on terror that honestly the one kudos to Biden is he's trying to actually extricate us from. The problem is you don't supplement that by increasing drone strikes, which is of course the same. It's the same thing with the border logic. Oh, okay, we're gonna have a pathway to citizenship. Oh, but we're gonna put tanks on the border. Like, no, people will die. That is no more humanitarian than before. You're just pandering to the right. Anyway, it's some 1984 for real when you talk about just the fact that no one covers it. ISIS-K's been around. Was anyone covering the number of Afghans who were killed by ISIS-K? No.
Yeah, and I mentioned I was going to give you a little bit of credit to a CNN reporter. Anna Coren covered this a couple of days ago. And look, if the media just covers it a tiny bit, the Pentagon feels pressure. And then in this case, they actually said something that was true because of that pressure. Imagine if the media covered it all the time accurately and was genuinely outraged by the insane number of civilians we kill on a regular basis in the middle of these wars. My God, in Iraq, I mean, there's a lot of different estimates. Roughly the number appears to be 700,000 civilians that were killed in that unnecessary war. Imagine if every day you turn on the TV, they were like, oh my God, another 182 civilians killed. And they showed picture of baby after baby, children after children. And you know what would have happened? We would have withdrawn from Iraq so long ago, well before we actually did. And maybe that's why you see the media reaction that you do when we withdraw, but never ever in the middle of the war. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.